It was a rainy afternoon in a small coastal town in Ireland when Emily found the old P-dated envelope tucked between the pages of her grandmother's Bible. The paper was fragile, yellowed with age, and the handwriting slanted. Elegant but slightly trembling spoke of a time long before her own. Her grandmother, Margaret, had passed away 2 months earlier, leaving Emily with not just the family house by the shore, but also countless unanswered questions. Emily remembered her grandmother as a woman of quiet strength, someone who baked bread every Sunday, hummed old Irish lullabies, and always kept her gaze on the horizon as if waiting for something or someone. But Emily had never seen this letter before. The front of the envelope bore no stamp, just a name written in deep blue ink to James with love. Inside was a single sheet of paper filled with words of longing, hope, and an unspoken promise. The date at the top read, November 2nd, 1945. Emily felt her chest tighten. She had never heard of a James in her grandmother's stories. She turned the letter over, searching for more clues, but found only a pressed 4-leaf clover tucked inside. It smelled faintly of sea salt and lavender, as though it had carried the scent of 2 worlds, one lost. One remembered dot. Something about the letter ignited a spark in Emily's heart. Who was James? Why had her grandmother kept this letter hidden for over 70 years? And why, after all this time, did the paper still carry so much emotion? Standing by the window, with the Atlantic waves roaring in the distance, Emily made a quiet vow. She would find James, or at least the truth about him. What she didn't know was that this search would take her across oceans, uncovering a love story interrupted by war, stitched together by hope, and kept alive by the fragile thread of memory. The next morning, Emily sat at the old wooden kitchen table with the letter spread out in front of her. The light poured in through lace curtains, casting soft patterns on the paper. She read the words again, more slowly this time, as though she could absorb the meaning through each loop of ink. My dearest James, I do not know if this letter will ever reach you, but I must write it all the same. The days here feel longer. Without you, the evenings colder. I walk by the shore every morning, watching the horizon as you told me to, hoping the sea will carry you back to me. They say the war is ending, but my heart will not rest until I see your face again. If you read this, know that I have kept my promise. I am waiting. Always, yours, Margaret. Emily traced the signature with her fingertip. Her grandmother had been barely 20 in 1945. A young woman during the final months of the Second World War. But James, his name had never been mentioned at family dinners, in bedtime stories, or in the countless afternoons Emily had spent helping Margaret in the garden. She decided to start her search in the attic. Dust hung in the air like tiny stars as she climbed the narrow staircase. The attic smelled of cedar and old books. She found boxes labeled kitchenware, Christmas ornaments, and then one that simply read Margaret Personal. Inside were photo albums, a tin box filled with seashells, and a stack of postcards from different parts of the world: France, Italy, Egypt. Most were unsigned, but a few had initials at the bottom. Jr. Could that be James? Emily took the postcards and the letter into town, heading straight for the local library. Mrs. Doyle. The librarian had known her grandmother for decades. When Emily placed the letter and postcards on the counter, Mrs. Doyle's eyes widened slightly. "Where did you find these?" she asked. In her Bible, Emily replied, "Do you know anything about James or Jr.?" The librarian hesitated. "Your grandmother. She was a very private woman. But I do remember hearing that she was once engaged to a young man who went off to fight in the war. He never came back. Some say he was lost at sea. Others, well, no one really knew." Emily's heart sank, but the uncertainty only fueled her determination. She asked if there were any records, newspaper archives, wartime registries. Anything not Mrs. Doyle led her to the back room where old editions of the County Gazette were stored. Hours passed as Emily flipped through brittle pages, her fingertips stained with ink and dust. Then, in an issue from December 1945, she saw it, a photograph of a young soldier in uniform, smiling faintly with the caption, "Local man James. Rowan missing after naval vessel disappears in Atlantic storm." Emily felt her breath catch. The eyes in the photograph, steady, kind, yet carrying something unspoken, were the same eyes she had seen in herself in the mirror. She copied the article, folded it carefully, and placed it with the letter. The pieces of the puzzle were forming, but there were still gaps. Why had Margaret never spoken of him? Had James truly been lost forever, or had there been more to the story? That night, the waves outside the house seemed louder, as if the sea itself remembered the young man who never returned. A week later, Emily sat in her grandmother's kitchen again, staring at the letter and the newspaper clipping as if they might suddenly speak. But no matter how many times she reread them, the same questions hung in the air. One night, while flipping through the postcards again, she noticed something she had missed before a faint, almost invisible embossed logo in the corner of one card from New York, beneath the image of the Statue of Liberty. The letters "The Seafarers Inn" were pressed into the cardstock. On the back, the handwriting was hurried, but it carried a message that made her heart skip. "I'm safe for now. We'll write again soon. J." Emily's hands trembled. James had made it to New York, at least for a time. The next morning, she booked a flight. Her friends thought she was being impulsive, but Emily felt a pull stronger than reason. It wasn't just about James anymore. It was about understanding her grandmother's life, her choices, and the love she had carried silently. For decades, New York greeted her with a roar of traffic and the smell of roasted chestnuts from street vendors. The city felt overwhelming. But Emily's first stop was obvious. She found the Seafarers Inn still standing in the Harbor District, its weathered brick walls now surrounded by modern glass towers. Inside, the lobby had been refurbished, but a wall near the bar displayed old photographs of sailors, ships, and guests from years past. Emily scanned the faces, her pulse quickening, till she found him, James Rowan, standing with two other men, his arm resting casually on the bar, a half-smile playing on his lips. The photo was dated February 1946. She asked the bartender if anyone knew the history of the place. An older man named Frank, who had worked there since the 70s, came over. When Emily pointed to the photograph, Frank nodded slowly. "Oh, him. James Rowan. Irish, if I remember right. Used to come in here after the war ended. He was quiet. Carried a bit of sadness with him. Then one day he just stopped showing up. Heard he might have gone west." "West? As in California?" Emily asked. Frank shrugged. "Maybe, or maybe just further inland. Back then, folks disappeared easy if they wanted to." Emily thanked him and left with a strange heaviness. She had proof James survived the war, but his trail was already fading. She decided her next step was to visit the New York Public Library's archives. There, she combed through old shipping logs, military discharge papers, and immigration records. It was painstaking work, but eventually, she found something: a passenger list from a train bound for Chicago in April 1946. With the James Rowan listed among the travelers, her journey continued. Chicago was cold, with winds that seemed to cut straight through her coat. She checked old address records and city directories. Finally finding a listing from 1947, James Rowan, employed at a steel mill. The building still stood, though now it was a museum. Inside, an elderly guide listened carefully to Emily's story. After a long pause, he said, "I remember hearing about a Rowan. He was close to one of my uncles. Quiet man. Played the piano. In the break room during lunch, do you know what happened to him?" Emily asked. The man's eyes softened. "I think he moved again, out to San Francisco. Chasing warmer weather, maybe, but I can't be sure." Emily felt both exhausted and encouraged. The pieces were scattered across an entire continent. Yet each one brought her closer. Every city she visited seemed to hold a faint echo of James's footsteps, as if he had left a trail not of physical evidence, but of stories tiny, almost invisible threads leading her forward. That night, in her Chicago hotel room, Emily pulled out her grandmother's letter again. She read it aloud softly, her voice catching on the last line. "I am waiting, always." Somewhere deep inside, she began to believe that James's story was not one of complete loss, but of a love that had been tested by time, distance, and the unpredictable tides of life. And now she was determined to see it through to its end, whatever that might be. San Francisco welcomed Emily with a sky streaked in soft orange and gold. The evening sun slipping behind the Golden Gate Bridge. The salty temps of the Pacific reminded her of home. Though the waves here felt different, less wild, or patient, she had only one lead: a steel mill worker's memory of James moving west. Through local records, she found an old phone directory. From 1951, buried in the R section, was a listing. Rowan, James musician. The address was in North Beach, neighborhood known for its jazz clubs in those days. The next morning, she walked the hilly streets, finding the building still standing, a faded blue apartment with a small cafe on the ground floor. The cafe owner, a silver-haired woman named Lucia, listened as Emily explained her search. Lucia's eyes lit up. "Oh, yes. James Rowan. He used to play piano here every Friday night. My parents owned this place back then. He was, how do I say, a gentle soul. Always wore the same gray suit, even when the cuffs were fraying. Played with such feeling, like each note had a story." Emily leaned forward. "Do you know what happened to him?" Lucia hesitated, as if reaching back through decades. "Stayed in San Francisco for maybe 10 years. Lived a quiet life, played in small bars. Then one day, he told my father he was moving to a little town up the coast. Said he wanted to be closer to the ocean again." Lucia disappeared into the back room, returning with a black and white photograph. It showed a younger James at the piano, his head tilted slightly, as if listening to something only he could hear. A small inscription in the corner read, "For M, always." Emily's throat tightened. Even after all those years, he had still been thinking of her grandmother. She took the bus north, following Lucia's vague directions. The road wound along cliffs and beaches until she reached a fishing village called Mendocino. There she found a local historical society in a small wooden building that smelled faintly of seawater and dust. The curator, a man named Harold, listened carefully. "James Rowan. Yes, I've heard of him. Lived here in the 60s, worked as a piano teacher. Folks said he was from Ireland and had lost someone during the war. Kept mostly to himself, but he was kind. Gave free lessons to kids who couldn't afford them." Harold rummaged through a drawer and pulled out a brittle newspaper, clipping from 1968. The headline read, "Local music teacher to perform benefit concert for orphans of the sea." The accompanying photo showed James, older now, with silver at his temples but the same steady eyes. Emily asked if there were any records of where he went after that. Harold nodded slowly. He stayed until the early 70s. Then he sold his house and moved inland. Some said Oregon, others said Washington. But he hesitated. He left behind a box for a friend who passed it on to the Historical Society. Years later, we've kept it in storage. Emily's heart pounded as Harold brought out a worn wooden box. Inside were sheet music, faded photographs, and, at the very bottom, a sealed envelope addressed to Margaret O'Connor. Her breath caught. The handwriting was unmistakable. She sat down on a bench by the window, Pacific glimmering in the distance, and carefully opened the envelope. "My dearest Margaret, if you are reading this, it means I never found my way back to you. I tried, I swear I did. The war ended, but by the time I made it home, you were gone from Ireland. I didn't know where to look, so I kept moving, hoping our paths might cross by chance. I've carried your letter with me all these years, worn soft by my hands. I never stopped waiting, in my own way. You once told me the sea connects us no matter where we are. I've chosen to live by it always, so that somewhere deep down we might still be looking at the same horizon. Yours always, James. Emily's hands shook. All this time her grandmother had been waiting on one shore while James had been searching. From another two hearts circling the globe, never quite meeting again. She closed the letter and stared out at the ocean, feeling an ache she couldn't name. But she also felt a strange sense of peace. As if she had finally bridged a gap her grandmother could not in that moment. She made a decision. She would take James's letter back to Ireland, to lay it beside Margaret's, so that last the two could rest together. Asterisk. The flight back to Ireland felt longer than the journey out. Emily kept the wooden box from Mendocino on her lap the entire time, as if letting it out of her sight might somehow loosen the fragile thread connecting her to James and Margaret. When she arrived at the old family house, the air was cool and damp. The sea outside roared against the rocks, as though greeting her return. She placed James's letter beside Margaret's on the kitchen table, the two envelopes touching like hands, finally meeting after decades apart. Her father, Daniel, came in from the garden and noticed them. "What's all this?" he asked, his brow furrowing. Emily explained everything from the first letter in the Bible to her journey across America. The photographs, the stories, the wooden box. As she spoke, she saw something shift in her father's expression, a mix of surprise, sorrow, and a faint smile. "I never knew," he said softly when she finished. She never spoke of James, but it makes sense now. The way she'd stand by the shore in the evenings, the way she kept that old gramophone, maybe it reminded her of him. They opened the rest of the box together. There were pieces of sheet music titled 4M, a few black and white snapshots of James in different cities, and a small tin containing a pressed four-leaf clover almost identical to the one Margaret had kept. Daniel picked it up carefully. "Looks like they carried this same token all those years." The next day, Emily visited the churchyard where Margaret was buried. The grave overlooked the sea, the horizon stretching endlessly beyond. She knelt and placed the two letters in a small waterproof case at the foot of the stone, tucking the four-leaf clover between them. "I found him, Grandma," she whispered. "I think he spent his whole life looking for you." A gull cried overhead, and for a moment, Emily felt as though the wind carried an answer, not in words, but in a quiet, settling peace. That evening, the village held its annual harvest dance in the town hall. Emily went reluctantly, more out of tradition than desire. But as the music started, she felt herself smiling. The band was playing a slow waltz, the kind her grandmother used to hum while baking bread. A man around her age with dark hair and kind eyes asked her to dance. His name was Liam, a local fisherman who had returned to the village after years abroad. As they moved across the floor, Emily found herself telling him in bits and pieces about her journey. Instead of the polite nods she expected, he listened with genuine interest. "Sounds like they had a love worth remembering," he said, "even if they didn't find each other again." Emily looked down for a moment. Maybe they did, in a way. It's through me. When the dance ended, Liam offered to walk her home. The night air was crisp, and the moon cast silver paths across the water. They stopped at the edge of the shore, the same place Margaret used to stand. "You know," Liam said, "sometimes the people we lose leave behind more than memories. They leave us lessons about how to live and how to love." Emily felt something stir inside her. For the first time since she'd opened that letter, she wasn't just thinking about the past. She was thinking about what came next. As they parted for the night, she glanced once more at the horizon. The sea was calm now, the tide slow and steady, as if the long journey, hers, James's, and Margaret's, had finally found its resting place. Asterisk, a week after the harvest dance, the house felt different. Emily still woke to the sound of gulls and The crash of waves, but there was a lightness in the air. As if the weight of untold stories had finally lifted. Each morning, she made tea and sat at the kitchen table where the 2 letters now rested in a small glass case. Sometimes she read them aloud, sometimes she just let her fingers rest on the glass, imagining that somewhere beyond the reach of time, James and Margaret could hear. One afternoon, she received a package from Harold, the curator in Mendocino. Inside was a small reel-to-reel recording labeled simply, James Rowan, Home by the Sea. Emily borrowed an old tape player from the library, threaded the tape, and pressed play. Soft piano notes filled the room, gentle, wistful, carrying the rhythm of waves. As the melody unfolded, Emily realized it wasn't just music. It was a conversation without words. She could almost hear her grandmother's voice between the notes, and James answering in kind. She closed her eyes, letting the music wrap around her like a warm tide. When the last chord faded, the silence felt sacred. That evening, she walked to the shore. The wind was calm, the sky streaked with pink and gold. She carried with her the pressed clover James had kept and the one Margaret had saved. Kneeling at the water's edge, she let them both go, watching the tide carry them out together. In that moment, she felt something shift, not just in her understanding of their love, but in her own heart. It wasn't about the tragedy of them missing each other. It was about the beauty of 2 people holding on to hope across a lifetime. She thought of Liam, of the warmth in his voice when he spoke about lessons from the past. Maybe love wasn't always about endings that lined up perfectly. Maybe it was about living in a way that kept the best parts of someone alive in you. As she turned back toward the village, the church bells rang in the distance. Their sound blended with the steady whisper of the waves, like a hymn written just for her. From then on, Emily made it a point to share her grandmother's story whenever she could at the local school, in the library, even at the harvest dance the following year. People would listen, some with tears in their eyes. And afterward, they would tell her their own stories of letters, of waiting, of loves that had crossed oceans but never quite made it home. And each time, Emily felt the same quiet certainty that telling the story was a way of giving James and Margaret the meeting they never had. In the hearts of everyone who heard it, the sea would always be there, stretching between the places they had walked, the shores they had watched. But now, for Emily, it no longer felt like a barrier. It felt like a bridge, one built from letters, music, and the kind of love that outlives even the longest separation. Asterisk if this story has reached you. If you followed Emily across oceans and decades, then you felt it too. The quiet strength of love that endures even when time, distance, and fate stand in the way. James and Margaret's letters were not just words on paper. They were proof that even in silence, love can speak. That even in absence, love can remain present. And that sometimes the journey to find the truth is as important as the truth itself. We all carry stories like theirs. They might be tucked away in an old box hidden in the back of a drawer or locked quietly in the corners of our hearts. They might be about people we've lost, dreams we've set aside, or promises we've kept only in our minds. But stories are meant to be told. They connect us across generations, across oceans, across the invisible distances we build in our own lives. And when we tell them, we breathe life back into the people and moments we thought were gone. So I ask you, who have you been waiting to remember? Who have you been meaning to reach out to, but haven't yet? Is there a letter you've been holding back from writing? A call you've been delaying? A story you've been afraid to share? Write it, call them, tell it. Because love, whether it finds its ending or not, changes the world simply by existing. And the world needs those stories, now more than ever. Let James and Margaret remind you that it's never too late to keep a promise, never too far to cross an ocean, and never too small to leave something behind that lasts. Somewhere, someone is still looking at the same horizon as you.